friendship and that kind of social connection piece, it's a huge part of our well-being, but it's the one that is still kind of untouched in terms of the kind of commercialization, productization of that, which in some ways is good, because these things probably shouldn't be commercialized and productized, because that's some kind of weird late stage capitalism kind of thing. And at the same time means that probably, there are elements of that are not being, I don't know, paid enough attention to by people as well.
My name is Simon Waller, and this is the Future with Friends podcast, a show where I make zero attempt to try and predict the future, even though I'm a trained futurist, and instead I enlist my friends to do it for me. Thankfully, I have some very smart and insightful friends. Some of them are best-selling authors. Most will be considered leading thinkers in their field of expertise. I guarantee that every single one of them will have compelling and unique insights to share about what might happen next. Each episode, I invite a friend onto the show to explore the future of anything that they would like. I then task them to go away and create a short scenario about that future set at least 5 years from now, something that captures their hopes and dreams, or maybe their fears and concerns. And then over the course of the show, we dissect that scenario. We start to think about the critical uncertainties, the alternate possibilities, and the decisions that we can make today to create the future that we want tomorrow. Welcome to The Future with Friends. Welcome to episode 1 of The Future with Friends. Today I'm being joined by Steph Clarke, who is a very dear friend and a fellow futurist who happens to be writing a book at this moment about friendships. So at a very meta level, I couldn't have asked for a better first guest on the show. In this episode, we go through a scenario that Steph has written about the future of friendships, starring herself and her Oura ring that now has the capacity to quantify the value of her friendships and her friends, and even the ability to dump those friends if they don't live up to expectations. Now, this may be a warning for people who are Steph's friends. It could be a warning for me, but let's jump into the episode and see what Steph has to say. So, Steph, welcome to the Future with Friends podcast. And when I say welcome to the podcast, I don't even mean just welcome to the show. Like literally 10 seconds ago when I pressed record, this whole thing came into reality.
Didn't exist 11 seconds ago.
Didn't exist until this moment. And so you're really getting in on the ground floor. You must be pretty happy with that.
That's right. I think, I am the champagne bottle against the side of this ship. Just to carry on your kind of boating metaphors that I do know that you like.
Yeah, it's not what I've used before, but you can definitely be the champagne bottle. That's awesome. Yeah. So the Future with Friends podcast, the premise of this is I invite friends on, like yourself, to talk about the future of their choosing. Obviously, just for the sake of the audience, we should probably legitimize that we are really friends.
Yeah, and I assume because I'm episode 1, that means like it's all just it's like in descending order.
If that's how you want to read into it, yeah, definitely 100%, Steph. Yeah, so, thanks. Kind of your memory though, the friendship. How do you see? What's your memory of this unfolding? Let's just make sure that the audiences can be clear. The friendship is real.
That's right. Actually, it's one of my, I don't know if it's my favourite, but it is up there as one of my favourite kind of friendship origin stories, because it speaks to your kind of your generosity and curiosity. So we met, I'd actually been following you in a non-weird way on LinkedIn for a couple of years and was like, this guy seems kind of somewhat clever and interesting. But it was COVID and, we couldn't see anyone. I was like, I will never see this man because we can't go and see anyone. And then we met at our mutual friend Mike Dixon's inaugural kind of event of the 3 that he ran, kind of 2022 to 2023, I guess it was. And we were sort of very early in a conversation. And then someone else kind of came in and sort of took your attention. They were like, Simon, and I just sort of stood there awkwardly, waiting for us to kind of carry on the conversation. And then I went, probably just going to go and have a conversation with someone else because this is not happening again. Anyway, so then we didn't really see each other for the rest of the event. And obviously I was really sad about that. And then a few days later, you messaged me on LinkedIn. You're like, we didn't get to finish that conversation. I actually really wanted to hear what you said about that. And I thought, That the fact that that had even like sort of stuck in your mind and that you had noticed that we had been interrupted and we didn't get to finish that conversation, I thought, oh, this guy seems actually like he might be quite nice as well as potentially quite interesting and clever. So there we go.
Wow. Well, I wasn't doing this part of the show for the accolades, but it's working out really well for my ego.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Far, anyway.
I do remember that happened after that, where we spent about half a day hanging out and walking through the art gallery.
We did.
And just talking about stuff. And we both have a shared interest in that kind of making time for those hangs and just kind of letting the conversation go where it will. And I think over the last few years, we've obviously had the chance to collaborate together. For a little bit of context for our listeners, Steph is a fellow futurist. And to be honest, I probably, so the ones who are listening to this and not watching this, Steph does have a very fancy T-shirt that just says, future, future, future on it, which coincidentally I do own the same T-shirt, and another futurist friend of ours had it as well because they were flogging them at Acme when they were doing the
Futures and Other Fictions,
the Futures and Other Fictions event in the beginning of this year. Now, when I was scouring my Rolodex for first guests, your name was actually at the top of the list. For a couple of reasons. One, the friendship is legit. But the second of all is that you are a futurist. And obviously having a futurist on a show called The Future with Friends seems very appropriate. But there was also another third thing, which was, although the premise of this is the guest, that is you, gets to choose the topic that you want to speak about, the future that you'd like to explore, I kind of had an inkling of which one you might choose. Can you share what what is the topic that we'll be exploring today?
Yeah, we're doing friendship.
Yeah, and I know that you were going to choose that, which was, again, how meta of us to have, a futurist on a show called The Future with Friends, who happens to be a friend talking about friendships, because you are at the moment writing a book about friendships. Is this not true?
This is very true, yes.
Yeah. And we may kind of tap into that a bit along the way. But for now, we may jump into the meaty part of the show, which is the bit where you have been tasked with writing a scenario about the future of friendship. So a scenario is kind of like a short story, so to speak, which helps us explore different kind of possibilities and uncertainties in the future. What was the time frame you decided to work with for this scenario, Steph?
Good question. Probably within that kind of 5 to 10 year kind of sort of nearer future, I would say.
Yeah, the nearer future.
Yeah.
And was there any particular reason for choosing that time frame?
Probably because when I was thinking about the scenario, I probably did a bit of kind of backwards rationalization of like, this is the kind of idea I had in this future that may play out, and then had a thought about, okay, well, what kind of timeline feels reasonable for this to feel like it's a little bit of a stretch, but also not so much that, oh, that's ridiculous type of thing.
Okay. Look, I think we have enough people in suspense now. I mean, that's assuming, obviously, acknowledging that this is episode 1 and we actually have 0 listeners, but I'm in suspense. Sarah, who's going to edit this, she'll be in suspense by this point, 100%. So maybe we're going to break into your scenario. So you're going to read this from start to finish. And then after you've kind of read it, we're going to kind of pull it apart a bit and have a bit of a chat about, what happens in this future and those different possibilities. So over to you, Steph. Tell us about the future of friendships.
It's Wednesday morning. I wake up and smush my phone alarm with my thumb until I finally hit the correct bit of the screen. Lifting the eye mask off my face, I squint one eye at the notification that is big and loud on my screen. It's from my Oura ring, and that my social score is low. A measly 53, in fact. This is the latest feature of the Oura ring. Alongside your readiness score, your sleep score, and your activity score now sits your social score, made up from your connectedness cadence, social battery, and friend health. The social score tells you how well you're doing in your social life. Setting it up a few months ago was interesting. I had to answer a bunch of questions from a psych bot, which analysed my preferences, my needs, and the lifestyle factors that might impact my social life, and determine what levels and type of social interaction is good and healthy for me. Unsurprisingly, my needs and appetite for connection were on the higher end of the scale. It was quite funny comparing my baseline with some of my friends who physically recoiled at how much interaction I could handle. Now, out of curiosity, I've actually paid the extra to have it connect to my social media and my messaging app. apps so that it can actually track who I'm in contact with the most and who I've been neglecting. Now, if there's a friend who I've tagged as someone that's important to me, someone like Simon maybe, and they've done the same for me, we both get a notification if we haven't been in touch enough recently. And also, if I've not spent enough time physically with people, I'll get a different warning, alerting me to go out and actually see some people in real life. But not all things are kind of good about this. Yesterday, I was actually reading an article about a company that's been using Oura rings for quite a long time to monitor their employees' health. And they're now giving their team members 5 social health days rather than sick days per year to top up their social score when it starts to drop below a certain level. And at first I thought that sounded quite cool, but I did wonder if people will start to deprive themselves of social time just so they can drop their number to a low enough level and hack their way to some additional leave. I was also listening to a podcast yesterday while I was out for a walk about some interesting social trends that are emerging because of this. One of the features of this Oura ring and the monitoring is that it knows who you've spent time with because it's integrated to your calendar and it uses NFC technology to know who you're with. And it will actually give you a health warning if the people you've spent time with have had a negative impact on your well-being. This has led to a new spate of friend dumping, just sending a friend a screenshot with your miserable metrics after spending time with them, which is pretty awkward if your friend had a positive health experience after being with you. People are actually worried about this happening to them, and they've started wearing specially designed perfumes that contain hormones and calming fragrances. A bit like those plug-in adapters you buy when you've got an anxious pet and you need to calm them down, to try and hack their friend's biology to not get dumped. It's a pretty weird new layer of friendship, and I can't help but wonder if it's actually driving us more apart and making friendships more stressful rather than a delightful part of our lives.
Oh, this is gold. This is fantastic. So we're going to break it down in a bit more detail soon. But the original, I love the light and shade. The slightly, it sounds very utopian initially, and then you kind of have a couple of little cracks in it. Like we'll kind of explore some of the emotions that you want people to experience reading this. And I like the little kind of almost like the knife in the back at the end where we start to go like, oh, really, is this what we're looking for? Yeah. Which is a great example. This is, I think, when you kind of talk about, futurism and scenarios, this is what it really does. It kind of almost leads you down a path of something that we think we would really want, but then has that ability to make us question it at the end and go like, hang on, is this the utopian outcome that we imagine we're going to get? Yeah. Before we get into that, though, can you tell me a little bit about what it was like writing the scenario? Can you tell me how you went about it? What were some of the critical uncertainties or the key things that were really felt important to you when you were kind of trying to craft your story?
I think this was easier for me than other scenarios I've had to write for kind of clients and things, because this is a topic I've been thinking about quite a lot in the book writing I've been doing, and just thinking about the conversations I've had with people around their social health and their, they don't always use that language, but the quality of their friendships, how much time they're spending with them. And it made me then think about other elements of our health. And I was thinking about friendship in this context of, it kind of sits in that box of important but not urgent. So therefore, it's often one of those things that we delay or defer or just don't kind of pay enough attention to until suddenly we either need something because something bad has happened to us and we need some support, or we just feel really lonely all of a sudden and we realize we maybe don't have the people around us that we do. Which then made me think about health, other kind of factors of maybe physical health, and how that probably is also important but not always urgent until there's something kind of goes wrong, and how people are trying to kind of, I suppose, hack that or remind themselves to drink water with an app or a bottle that kind of flashes at you or whatever it is that reminds you to do those important physical health things. So then it made me just sort of merge those things together. So for this one, it was probably more some of the apps and the application of the apps that idea came first, and then backwards sort of reverse engineered that into, okay, well, what would the social conditions be for that to be the case? How might people be trying to get around those things? So it probably started with more of the idea rather than the future, if that makes sense. Whereas sometimes I would start from a future or a time frame or something and think about, from there rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so obviously in your day job, you do some of this type of work with your clients. Often in those examples, we don't necessarily get to choose the topic. And I think that is kind of one of the nice things about this premise, is that you get to choose the topic of whatever you want to talk about. But yeah, is there a difference in the approach that you've taken to this because it was something that you have like such a personal connection with versus how you might approach it if you were doing it with a client?
I think probably with a client, I stick a little bit more to the frameworks and things of doing scenarios. So whether that's a 2x2 or whether that's the data or kind of the 4 types of scenarios where you might have the decline and the collapse and the kind of the new status quo kind of coming in and things like that. Whereas this one, it was a little bit freer. I could just think of it as a vignette of something that might happen, rather than a structured sort of scenario that has to sit across against other scenarios as well and make sense and have that kind of internal consistency across the suite of them. So there was fewer angles and levers I had to play with this one. It could just be as it was, which is nice. I think it's good to do that. And I think actually just doing those on their own as a tiny little vignette or a tiny little thing from a future is just really healthy to kind of build that muscle, so that therefore when you start to then think about the bigger suites of scenarios you might have to build or something, that muscle is just a bit more honed and toned, ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight. And even in the development of the podcast, I've been playing around with writing some scenarios just for myself. And again, like you, I do a lot of that work with clients. And I noticed that, having that freedom allowed me to explore different styles that I wouldn't normally choose to explore. If I was doing with a client, I find that once with clients, you almost have to kind of set the tone of the scenario to be something that has to strike a chord with them and hit certain points for them. Whereas this, as you said, becomes more like just describe something, can explore a space. So yeah, I definitely get that difference.
Yeah, and for that reason, this probably took me 15, 20 minutes to write because it all just kind of came out at once. And there's a bit of tweaking and things I did, but pretty much it kind of came out almost fully formed, which I think is generally not my experience with the sort of the client ones I do, where you've got to make sure the elements of the strategy are covered and these other types of pieces as well.
Yeah. A couple of things I really particularly like, or what really struck me, and I think this is, when you talk about really good scenarios, is that we can see the evidence in the present for this future that's about to happen. And a couple of things that came up for me really quickly was, we see these kind of news articles around that, like loneliness is like worse than smoking in terms of early death.
Yeah.
And then I think about that from the context of a health system. And a good friend of ours, Dr. Adrian Medhurst, who just happens to be the second guest on this show next week. But he once said to me this whole premise of we don't really have our health system, we have a not sick system. So we go to the doctors when we're sick and they make us not sick, but we don't really have a genuine focus on health as such.
Yeah.
And kind of I felt like this as well. It's like, those kind of comments you're making is like this alerts you when your friendship is at an unhealthy level and its job is to bring you back to health. It's not necessarily about what does it mean to have really rich and meaningful friendships. What it's really about is kind of treating loneliness through the lens of, like as you said, you're measuring like you'd measure your heartbeat or your blood glucose levels or whatever it might be. And when it gets to a low point, we're going to tell you so that you can fix it.
Yeah. And I think the kind of good side of that to an extent is for people to get an earlier warning than when something's really gone wrong. So there's obviously, as with all of these things, there's the good and the bad element of it. And at the same time, for them to have that prompt to think about, well, what are the conditions that are making this the case for me at the moment? Is it because I've just had a baby and therefore, of course, I'm not seeing my friends because I have to keep this thing alive? I obviously don't have children. That's just how I assume people have to think. Or I'm working really hard and actually that's coming at a cost, or I'm traveling a lot for work or for fun, and therefore it's coming at a cost of my connections to my friends or whoever it is that's around me. So there's that piece of a little bit of this is good and helpful. However, as with most things, if that's what you're rewarding, if that's what people are over analyzing and overemphasizing with the scores and the little things that are kind of being gamified, then where does that end up being hacked, or you just kind of do the bare minimum? It reminds me a bit of have you seen the Super Flux video from about 10 years old now of this older guy who lives on his own, probably in his sort of 70s, maybe 80s, and his adult children don't come to visit him, but they've kitted out his home with all these smart devices. It's the walking, this sort of walking stick that makes sure he gets his how many steps a day, and this smart plate or smart fork, I think it is. It's like, well done, you've had some broccoli, and if he eats fish and chips, it's like, oh no, don't, flush his red and don't do that. All these different things. Anyway, so at first, in the absence of them coming to see him, which actually is really what obviously he wants and would be a much better experience. So, at first he's sort of, putting this broccoli on the fork and forcing it in his throat. And then eventually he just starts to hack these things. So he sort of puts the broccoli on the fork and then in the other hand eats a slice of pizza or whatever, because the fork's just going the same bit of broccoli over and over. And he's paying one of this young lad, neighbor, to then take the walking stick out. So it looks like he's gone for a run, basically. And then his kids sort of sending these messages like, oh, well done, Dad, you got all your steps in today, or like, great choice on dinner, kind of thing. But it's all a farce. And I think that's the risk with this type of thing, is maybe to a point it's useful, but is it really what we're trying to get to, or is that really a good outcome?
Yeah. It reminds me, there's a line that I use in one of my keynotes, and we talk about what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
But ultimately what gets measured gets gamed. As soon as we come up with the measure, somebody's trying to work out how to game the measure. And, I kind of see a bit of that, like almost like the starting of that in this. And that's interesting is that, like, as the wearer of the ring, there's not necessarily a vested interest in you to game the system. But at the same time, by kind of only pointing to certain indicators of what this thing called friendship is, you find yourself suddenly skewing your behaviors and in a way that actually may not necessarily be healthy. Yeah. And I think that example of, like, you literally, the friend dumping piece, it's like, rather than thinking about that through the lens of the long-term value of that kind of connection with another human being, even if it means that in the short term, you're giving more to that relationship than perhaps you're receiving back again. Yeah. It's like it takes this very narrow set of metrics around, well, what does a good, healthy friendship look like? And then gives you the advice of, like, I think you should break up with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if it's still in the context, which, I think maybe in that 5 to 10 year period will probably still be the case, of a fairly individualistic approach to life in the world and culture, particularly in a sort of more Western civilization and world. All these kind of social media posts, Instagram influencers, and all these kind of, fake therapists who are like, don't be around energy vampires and stuff. And of course, like, again, like, to a point, like, they've got a point. Like, you don't want to be around people who are just constantly whatever. But if your friend's having a bad time, and that's why it was a bit of an energy suck to spend time with them because they are struggling or something's, not going well for them. If then you are taking this kind of literal approach to, oh, well, I shouldn't spend time with these people because that's what that pink square on Instagram told me to do, or this, whoever, then that's why we end up, again, it's not, we're not thinking about the more holistic connection and the value of a friendship and whatever it is. And also the to and fro and the up and down of friendships. And I think that's important. That is part of life and connection and relationships.
Yeah, so obviously, Steph, like, you're writing a book about friendship, and I accept that your depth of understanding this space is, like, well above mine, but I've always had a really deep interest in the concept of belonging and what it means to belong. And I kind of have this, like, one of my theories is this kind of like the asymmetry of friendships, which is that if you think about when great friendships are formed, it's often when we're younger, where there's an asymmetry between what we need and what we can give. So often we have a deep need, like, I need to move house, and literally I have no way of doing it without enlisting my friend's help.
Yeah.
And so our friends, though, have bucket loads of free time because they're kind of basically, delinquent university students.
Yeah.
So for them to give that time was cost them very little, and what we received felt so big. And we have a number of these transactions with our friends over time, and we feel this kind of mutual indebtedness to each other as a result of it, because when we giving was easy, and when we got something, it was really significant to us. And as part of that, though, where that kind of sense of kind of conviction in that belonging or friendship exists was never actually in the giving, it was in the receiving. It was in the need that I had, and you were there, Steph, when I really needed you. And I kind of think, again, with this scenario, again, and even that the examples you're giving around kind of, the social advice on, emotion sucking vampires and things like that. And all of that's based on the premise of people are taking more than they're giving. And it's like, yes, because that's where belonging comes from. It comes from when we need to take. And it's not taking, it's receiving in a sense. Like it's something deeper than how we kind of frame it in the simplest terms.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. All of those things. And I think there's been, in the writing of the book, so the book is more of I suppose it's more of a handbook in some ways around and showcasing ways that other people friend. So the ways that people spend time together more meaningfully, creatively, interestingly than just going for dinner or going for brunch or just getting together once a year for someone's birthday kind of thing. And what's been really good and interesting and quite cool in the conversations I've had, because people now just talk to me about this stuff all the time, it seems. And so much of the conversation is around that, actually, the hard time stuff as well. And the things that people did, not just to give help, support, whatever was needed, be it emotional, practical, physical, whatever that the situation was, but actually the conditions that someone created to allow for that to happen in a useful, meaningful way. And I think that's really interesting as well, because there's a couple of examples in the book of people who needed some help during a particular time because they were quite injured or they were unwell or whatever was going on, and they were actually quite explicit about like, hey, this is what I need, who's in? And people love to help, but often people don't know how to, and we don't always make it easy for them to help, because we're like, oh, I don't know what I need. And that is obviously completely legitimate for a lot of people as well. They just don't know what support they need. And so, it's just really made me think about the give and take as well, and had a conversation with someone quite close to me relatively recently around them feeling like they couldn't kind of give enough in this sort of relationship, friendship that we have. And I was like, well, that's fine, because like this thing is going on for you at the moment. And of course, and that will go the other way at some point. And, and you still do give in many ways that is still really meaningful and all the rest to me and to this relationship. It's not that I feel like you're completely, taking advantage or anything like that. So I think there's a lot of more interesting conversations we can have about give, take, and the kind of the balance sheet, for want of a better word, of relationships. Yeah.
So interesting with this scenario is that you've put yourself in it.
Mm.
And tell me about the decision to do that, and how much of this is potentially I don't know what the like autobiographical means when it hasn't happened yet, but what like tell me about why you put yourself in it. Tell me about what are the lessons that you're trying to perhaps learn from your own future in this scenario.
So please psychoanalyze yourself is what I'm hearing.
Pretty much.
What is wrong with you, Steph, that has made you do this? I think this one just felt really easy to put myself into, and my preference generally is to write more first person, or at least maybe second person, I guess, but preferably first person futures, because those have always been the scenarios or the stories or whatever that have made the most impact to me. So this is purely probably a selfish, what's the word, kind of projectioning on what I prefer. So therefore I find easier to write as well, is that first person narrative, because then if you can put yourself in it, and the I can be you, like if you were reading this and it says I, like you will read it as yourself as well. So again, it is me, but it's sort of not me. It's anyway. But
you do own an Oura ring, correct?
I do. Yeah. So again, like this was this is a true story, but not a true story type of thing. They put in the beginning of the Fargo episodes. Like this is a true story, but all the facts have been changed, kind of thing. But this one is not, because I have an Oura ring and I have friends. So
and your name is Steph. So there's three things we can pin down for certainty. Yeah.
I'm currently developing a perfume so that more people like me. So don't look in the bath. So anyway, so that is my preference, to write stories or write futures and scenarios like that, because I want people to feel it and be like, oh, like, yeah, I might think that in that situation, or, oh no, I wouldn't do that in that situation, or I would make a different decision. Like, great, that's the reaction I want people to have, especially if we're doing something slightly two-dimensional, for want of a better word, that as a story, as something that is black and white and written on paper or a screen or whatever. So that to me is important, because those are the ones that have had the most impact to me, particularly the stories and examples that come out of Jane McGonigal's work around in the Institute of the Future and her book Imaginable. It was reading some of those that made me think, wow, like this is so powerful when you write it from that perspective. And I guess because that was also the first, I suppose, more like formal futures education that I did was through the Institute for the Future. That is their general advice as well, is to write things from that first person kind of narrative.
So one of the things when I tell people about futurism and the value of scenarios, I talk about this idea that the future is a safe space to have difficult conversations. Like we can talk about things which are a little bit confronting, but because they're set in the future, they're like hypothetical, and the impact for us doesn't feel as immediate, so we can be a bit more open to it.
Yeah.
So with this scenario, what is it that you think that we're exploring, or some of the things that we're exploring that, you know, what are the lessons we would take away from it, or perhaps you would take away from it, given it's about you? What are the things that we're exploring that are a bit hard for us to hear, that if we put them in the present?
That we would get to that stage where we have to outsource our thinking about the people we love and like the most to a ring, a necklace, or, you know, whatever the tech is. Like the tech is sort of irrelevant, really. But that we would have to kind of outsource that care to something else to remind us, like, you know, your friends, you should probably like chat to them or talk to them or see them or whatever it is. Like that to me is kind of tragic, but feels completely likely because of the reality that we live in, and actually the system, you know, that we live in, where those are the things that, like I said, people are quite happy to, or not happy to, but comfortable to, in the sense that that's what most of us do, put on the back burner or put to the side, because the urgent things of work in particular is, you know, takes over so much. And there's a much more, and for most people, the work bit is much more urgent, not just because of the you know, the need to earn money, but because the implications of letting that slide or whatever are generally much quicker to materialize than the risks of putting your health or your friendships to the side for a while.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about within futures around the concept of backcasting. So what would happen before this that led to this future being in existence? And one thing I can imagine, and it kind of goes back to that comment before about, you know, what gets measured gets done, is we kind of have apps that remind us to exercise. And if it wasn't for those apps, we probably wouldn't get up and off the couch and go for a run. And we have apps that tell us, you know, what we should eat. And if it wasn't for that, we'd probably be binging on chocolate. And we have apps that tell us when we're meant to check our email, because otherwise we'd probably check it all the time. And so it's almost like, you know, friendships, like the stuff that is more intrinsically valuable to us, could easily be taking a back seat, not intentionally, just because there's apps to remind us of everything else, and there wasn't an app to remind us of that. And so suddenly it's like, oh, well, shit, if I want there to be an even playing field, and I want this was always more important to me, and we could easily see that rather than get rid of all the other apps that remind us of everything else, let's just add one more app that reminds us of our friendship. So you could easily see how we could have slid into this quite unintentionally. And then find ourselves, as you said, like, and it starts with something quite innocuous, like, have you called your mum recently? And then suddenly it's this next thing, which is, no, look, I think you should break up with that friend of yours because they're an energy sucking vampire.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as well, I was talking to a psychologist friend a couple of months ago over lunch, and we were talking about friendship and all these things. He was like, yeah, I mean, friendship is almost the last part of well-being in a kind of, you know, more holistic sense, I guess, that has not yet really been productized and commercialized.
Except for Facebook, obviously, where they 100%
true.
productized all our friendships for us.
Yeah, in a different way, though.
No, I know what you're saying.
I think you're right. You're absolutely right. Social media has kind of done that, but in quite a different way. Whereas for dating, like, yeah, I mean, there's a manner of things we can sign up for and pay for and sign our lives away for around dating, health, you know, physical health, of course, mental health more recently, yes. But friendship and that kind of social connection piece, it's a huge part of our well-being, and there's all sorts of links to our longevity and things around our quality of friendships, and or a lack of loneliness that has an impact to how long we live and all of those types of things. But it's the one that is still kind of untouched in terms of the kind of commercialization, productization of that, which in some ways is good, because these things probably shouldn't be commercialized and productized, because that's some kind of weird post late stage capitalism kind of thing. And at the same time means that probably there are elements of that are not being, I don't know, paid enough attention to by people as well. So again, there's the light in the dark on that.
Yeah, I think there's also another interesting aspect of this.
I'm writing a book. So.
There's another aspect of this about, like, I wrote a post not long ago about, our need to be comfortable with uncertainty. And one of the things that apps do a really good job of is giving us a sense of certainty in uncertainty. So, we get in our car and we put on Google Maps, and it tells us exactly how long it's going to take to get to our destination, even though it's not correct. And we get a weather app that tells us what the weather's going to be all week, even though it's kind of a bit of a guesstimate. And the further we go out, the variability goes up quite dramatically, but none of that's actually shown to us in the app, right? And I think there's a bit around that kind of that social sense of social security, where it's like, are we friends? Because like what actually even defines friendship? And I can imagine an app that basically, even if it's not as binary as not friend or friend, there might be a scale where there's 7 points along the scale, and like best friend forever, very good friend, and how people might find a false sense of security and just being able to put a label on something and go like, so wow, that's really great that Steph and I are now in the very good friend category. This is amazing. What could I do to increase our friendship score? Yeah.
I literally had a call with someone 2 weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago today, about someone who's building basically that app. There's slightly different mechanics to it, but essentially, that.
Yeah. One other thing I wonder would be really, again, in like a version of this scenario or in this world, would be kind of like, I've not done the online dating thing. Like my relationship with my wife started before that was a thing. But my experience of talking about it with people is, like there's the swipe left, swipe right thing, but almost how it's so commodified, the concept of how to have a relationship with someone, that almost every time you enter into a relationship, on the back of it, there's an emptiness to it, because almost like you can't unknow what happened right before you kind of connected. And there's a version of that in this. It's like, I need some new friends. I'm going to have to start doing some swiping to get to the friend that I need. But ultimately, those things will become really hollow, because the premise by which it was created had no sense of kind of meaningfulness to it. Like, it didn't have our origin story where we kind of bumped into each other at an event after you obviously had been stalking me for a while. And then, spent half a day at an art gallery, like, this is a cool person to hang out with.
And also like my friend Beck, this is probably my favorite friendship origin story, is we met on the 109 tram coming back from the city, going back to Port Melbourne at the end of a day. And she was carrying a flip chart, and I thought, I like people with flip charts. And I squished my way through the tram to her.
Flashed some post-it notes at her,
showed her my Neulands, and I was like, that's only facilitation nerds will get that joke. But I was like, so what have you been facilitating today? Like some kind of creep. And she was just like, oh God, like, who is this woman? Stop talking to me. And anyway, so then and then I realized the company that she owns and is her business, Rowboat, and I was like, actually I've seen some of your work at this other place, at One Roof, when they had a physical space, this kind of community group. And then she was like, okay, maybe she's not completely off the wall. Anyway, we had this whole conversation. Then I made her be friends with me, and that's so every May, every 14th of May, we have our trammiversary. And that's the
do you ride a tram together? Has that happened?
Well, I really want to do that. I really want to do the whole 109 route together on the 14th of May. That's my goal. But then COVID, and then she moved to the UK for a year, very inconveniently. So anyway, she's back now. So maybe this May we'll actually get to 6 years. It'll be this May.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll then got to do the 109, the full 109. Whereas, the guy I've been seeing, we met on an app, and that's actually the joke, is he was like, oh, you were the only one who sent me a message, kind of thing. Like, you'll do.
And you're like, no, I'm very selective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Don't, and to hear these other stories about my friendships and stuff, I'm not just a stalker, okay?
No, exactly. Yeah. I will find you wherever.
Hey, so again, like another kind of core concept when you go about, like you mentioned before, like the 2x2 matrix, and we talk about the concept of critical uncertainties. What are the big things, the big drivers of change that we see in the environment that we don't really know how they'll go? And when we had that level of uncertainty around, and we kind of explore, like, well, what happens if it went all the way in one direction or all the way in the other? I know you said you didn't use that as a kind of as a basis of creating this scenario, but I imagine there are some critical uncertainties in it. Which are the ones? What's one or two that you kind of go, yeah, this is the one where I don't know which way this one's going to fall yet, and if it was to fall the other way, what is the big shift that we might see?
The big one is probably the kind of mega trend, I guess, for want of a better word, of the loneliness epidemic. And within that, maybe, or maybe even separately, is the social constructs and things we have that friendship is very much secondary to a romantic relationship or our kind of, marriage or a partnership in that way. So I think there's probably a couple of things there that actually probably assumes that those things have kind of stayed the same. And I think there are some really other interesting futures that could have played out if I'd done like a whole series of these, where actually some of those social constructs have started to break down or to change and to shift, because like you literally could not own a home, for example, as a single person in that 5 to 10 year period. Or it is, and either that's because that's illegal because of housing shortages and stuff in certain countries, maybe that's not everywhere. So actually you can't live on your own. That's not allowed anymore. So therefore you have to, if you're not in a relationship where that's the case, and actually then that you're cohabiting, you have to live with friends. So actually you then have this more forced dynamic where you're always spending time with your friends, you're house sharing. And there's those types of things that have happened, and maybe then policies around, even workplace policies around leave. So actually at the moment, for most places, bereavement leave or that kind of carers leave type thing is only really if you lose someone very, an immediate family member.
Yeah, it has to be a nuclear family member for it to be valid. But yeah, the idea, what if that was for friends?
Yeah, what if your best friend, or even just a close friend, doesn't have to be your best friend or whatever, is going through cancer treatment and they need some support? Or what if someone, again, a close friend dies and you want to take some time off, to acknowledge or to go through that process. But actually at the moment, that's probably, I'm sure some employers would be open to that conversation and would be fairly relaxed about that. But there's probably a lot who are like, no, the policy is for a nuclear immediate family member or a parent that isn't necessarily living with you. So so I think those types of things would be really interesting, that actually this scenario almost becomes irrelevant in a world where friendship is much more ingrained into our daily lives, in terms of who we're living with, in terms of our kind of social connection and kind of in somewhat like legal connections as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that like a potential wild card in this scenario is housing policy. And I know you've done some stuff with your own kind of the Signal Social Club that you run. I think I came to the one that you did around kind of the housing thing. And there was a couple of people there who are really big on the, really deeply invested in the kind of co-housing concept. And you can see how, like, if we have a housing shortage and the premise is that you just can't have empty bedrooms, we can't afford as a society for people to have multiple empty bedrooms. So, that would maybe force people into co-housing, even if it wasn't from a purely financial perspective, though I think that would be another very legitimate driver for it. But as you said, suddenly you create these friendships that are in some ways indistinguishable from what we would have normally considered a relationship. So I think that's a really interesting kind of critical uncertainty in this space. Any other ones that kind of come up for you in this?
Well, then, there's probably then another sub point to one of those. It's just around, I suppose, parenting and sort of that idea of the nuclear family and mum and a dad and 2.4 children and a dog or whatever. Although obviously it should be a cat, whatever, doesn't matter. We're not talking about that. So the point around parenting and co-parenting as well, and around people deciding that, and particularly in countries, which is many countries in, again, particularly the West, but also in a lot of Asia and Southeast Asia as well, where fertility rates and birth rates are plummeting, and therefore there's all these things in place to try and help people have more children. Does that mean that then it will become more acceptable, which I know is in some places, isn't in others, of course, for two friends or three friends to have a baby, either adopt, through multiple different methods, through adoption, through, doing that themselves, through kind of, IVF and surrogacy kind of situation, whatever it is, to enhance the birth rate? And actually, would you get some kind of tax rebate? And actually, that would be available to not just couples in a romantic sense, and certainly not just heterosexual couples, but actually open to friendship groups as well? And what kind of, again, legal policies and stuff like that would need to support those types of arrangements and those types of family makeups?
Yeah, I think this is what I love about this is I think even just in these conversations, you're highlighting this whole premise that obviously this is not, this is not the truth.
No, it's not a prediction. No.
It's not a prediction, but it contains elements of the truth. There's things in it that we will see play out in some way or another. We're likely to see some, as you said, you have friends working on the app, which is about how do we quantify a friendship in a more so than we obviously do at the moment. But there's multiple different scenarios and futures that we could be exploring in this space. So as much as I think we've got this one scenario is really just a great starting point for a much bigger conversation around friendships more broadly.
Yeah, and I think that's what good scenarios and good futures work does, is actually the scenario or the artifact or just the thing that we create is kind of irrelevant. It's really a catalyst. It's a vehicle to a better, broader, bigger, more interesting conversation. That is this, like all the conversation we've just had there is completely irrelevant to an Oura, the Oura ring or an app or something. It's about the social constructs of friendship. And I think where we can have those conversations, and there's a client I was doing some work with a year ago who are a homewares retailer. And so they, the initial conversation we had was, we need something on the future of retail. And I was like, I think you need a conversation about the future of home. Like that's a way more interesting conversation than will there be shops or not? And we can involve, obviously we can think about some of that stuff as well, but really how will people live? Like that's your real business is home, not retail.
So with this, I kind of, I talk about the difference between fast futures and slow futures, and fast futures is kind of like the fast food of futurism, where we kind of wow people with selfie drones and Wi-Fi connected suitcases, but ultimately don't give them anything of real substance or value. It's almost like we're going to it's based purely on the novelty that we can generate. And it really does feed that part of our brain, which is almost like, it's like the equivalent of having a sugar hit to the brain. For me, those slow futures is how do we contemplate the future so that we can make better choices in the present? I'm curious as to, as I said, I know you spend a lot of time, thinking in this space around friendships and stuff. Curious as to is there anything, having written this or had this conversation, that you've kind of gone one thing I might do a little bit differently now? Is there something you've taken away from the process?
From a selfish perspective, it validated, and of course it did because I came from my brain and I'm writing the book, it validated the need for the book because it made me think, actually, this is not a future I want. And so if I can have a little impact on however many people end up reading the book or use the work around the book or whatever to enhance their friendships to a point where this kind of functionality of an app or whatever it is becomes somewhat irrelevant, then that's a good outcome. So for me, it was probably there was that part from a selfish perspective, and then I suppose my own kind of view of, again, that's not what I want to get to a point where I'd be interested in that data just as a bit of from a nerdy perspective, but not in a way that I would want to be necessarily changing my relationships or my friendships on the basis of it, I don't think. But then maybe that's where I'm wrong. Maybe actually getting that data, maybe go, I was wrong about all my friends. Simon's a terrible influence on me. I should definitely, my stress score is through the roof when I've spent time with you. So, yeah.
Well, look, I hope that doesn't come to pass. But I've always struggled a little bit with, that whole quantified self movement. And it's funny because I know as a term, I remember hearing about it a lot, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And there was a lot of, and maybe it was at the time when a lot of these kind of apps and kind of devices were in their infancy. And so there was a lot more people perhaps talking about it. Maybe there's a whole bunch of people who are using it, but we just kind of have lost the terminology around it. But for me, it's like I've always been challenged by the concept, and it kind of like I almost want the dumbest smartwatch that I can possibly have.
Mm.
Like I don't want to buy into all of that quantification piece. So and sometimes I just wish I just managed to go back to literally a dumb watch that just tells me the time.
You can buy that. Like, that shouldn't be hard for you to resolve.
No, I know. Again, it's without
I'll buy you a dumb watch. Don't worry about it.
Thank you. To be honest, I'll tell you the number one feature of my smartwatch is that my alarm in the morning is a vibration on my wrist.
Oh yeah, that to me is actually, again, the one thing I want from a smartwatch.
Yeah, like the idea of not being woken up with noise, not some screechy alarm, but literally just like a gentle tap on the wrist. It's like, Simon, it's probably time to go. It's time. It's time now. Yeah. Anyway, the last thing though, so that with that Oura thing though, like has that made you question your relationship with the data at all, or you already had a questionable relationship with it?
Look, I definitely, and it's always funny whenever I literally last week had a conversation. I sat next to this guy at a co-working space. I hadn't really met him before. We had a conversation because he was charging his, and we had a chat. And everyone always has the same conversation when you talk to someone else who's got one of these sorts of devices, like, oh, how many times do you think, yeah, that was a great sleep. Oh, I'm so refreshed. You look at your data, it's like, oh no, it was a terrible sleep. I'm not going to get through the day. How will I survive? Like, I need to immediately go back to bed and cancel everything in my diary. Whereas actually your natural inclination or whatever it is that it was you were fine. You feel good.
Yeah, but you go suddenly go like, oh, well, clearly I was wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like I have a generally pretty healthy relationship with that data, and I generally will be like, oh, okay, I'll go with how I feel, and actually, even if it was bad, but I feel fine, like that's okay. Like I can get through the day, I can do what I need to do. Like that's a good thing. However, being able to kind of question like, oh, what could have happened? Did I do anything particularly unhelpful last night that made that be the case, or whatever it is? So I feel like I have a generally pretty healthy relationship with the data, and that the data I find most useful and most that I use the most is the data that is hard to necessarily have. I suppose naturally is probably, I don't know if that's the right kind of word, but which is around like my cycle and things like that as well. Like you can't always, so my body temperature, for example, on this, I find super helpful at kind of working out like where I am and what that means, compared to maybe the sleep stuff, which is useful and interesting to a point, but I probably hold, definitely kind of more lightly than maybe some of the other data.
But you're obviously deeply invested in the friendship data that it will give you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that very much. I'm currently, that's right. I'm going to go round into their seed round for that new feature. Yeah.
Hey, so we talked around the book a little bit, like not necessarily to it directly. Now, obviously, you haven't finished writing it. It hasn't been edited or printed, and no one can buy it yet.
Yeah, that's correct.
But with those caveats in place, do you want to share a little bit about, because you did allude to it before in some ways, this scenario kind of validates the premise of the book and why you're writing it. Do you want to share a little bit about what the premise is and why you're writing it?
Yep. The book is called How to Friend, as Simon says. Like, this is a terrible sales pitch because you cannot buy it. It doesn't yet to exist. However, it's in process. It's in the progress of coming into existence. And it's all about the things that people do with their friends to enhance their friendships and spend more quality, meaningful, interesting time together that goes beyond brunch or beyond like just once a year getting together for someone's birthday. Though there are some birthday examples in there too. So I've got all these different submissions from people, and it's really a showcase of those, but plus some kind of prompts for people to kind of do that in their own lives and friendships as well. And the way I would love the book to be used, so it's not a dense prose kind of book. It's going to be really beautifully designed so that each of the ideas kind of stands out and is a lovely sort of image or lovely page sort of layout and things as well, so that people could snap a photo, send it to their friend and be like, should we try this? To get over that initiation gap. Like that's really the kind of, I suppose, the insight I'm working on, is that people want to do more with their friends. People want to spend more quality time with their friends, and that's amazing. And at the same time, time poor and kind of creativity poor, I think, is probably true as well, around kind of thinking about something different to do that isn't just going for a drink or going for dinner or maybe going to the cinema or going, something like that. And that initiation gap of feeling like, oh, well, will it be weird if I suggest something that's a bit different or a bit kind of more involved or whatever it is than just the default? And so yeah, so if that helps people get over that and sort of snap that photo and because it looks nice and it's kind of fun and interesting, sort of flick it to their friend and be like, hey, should do this. And you see that all the time on social media, like you see these kind of things, or a new restaurant will open or a new spa or something, and everyone's tagging their friends like, should we go, should we go, should we go, hey, how about this type of thing? Like, great, like let's do that in other things as well.
And I know obviously over the course of developing it, you've been kind of reaching out to people and asking them for examples of great friending.
Yep.
Is there any like one that you'd like to share that you kind of like, oh, this one was like really struck me as being something that like, that's cool.
Are you hoping that I'm going to bring up one of yours? Is this what this is?
No, my next question was going to be, am I in the book, Steph? But for now, it was actually just a more general question.
Several of your examples are in there, so this is great. There's probably one, and it's one I share quite often with people because I just think it's such a cool, simple idea, but it's so impactful. And so one of the questions people ask me a lot is, oh, but have any men actually submitted anything? Because the men, they don't hang out together, and they're a real problem around friendship. And one of my favorite male friendship, I've got a bunch of male examples in there of submissions from guys, which is great. One of my friends, John, submitted one, or he told me about this and I've put it in the book. So is that with 3 of his groups of male friends, they all have separately in the 3 groups a joint bank account. So the joint account, everyone puts the same amount in every month. That same amount is based on kind of the highest, lowest amount that someone can put in the group. So it kind of offsets any kind of difference in earning or whatever is important. And they put the money in the account every month, and it adds up. And when it gets to a certain amount, they go for a weekend away, or they go for a big, ridiculous meal, and they order the extra bottle of wine without worrying, oh, it's got to come out of this month's paycheck, and how am I going to explain this, or whatever, because the money is just there. Like, they can spend it on having a good time. And with some of those groups, like I think one of the groups in particular, he says that they don't put in loads every month, but so it might take 18 months for them to actually get to a kitty that is good, enough to for all of them to go and do something really cool. But that's 18 months they get to kind of catch up, plan, think about what it could be, and like have all these ideas and things. And they know that will happen. Like they are kind of guaranteeing fun.
Yeah.
In some ways, which I really like.
I like that. It reminds me a little bit of, there's a group of friends I go away with for a boys' weekend. But one of the things that's probably really unique about it is the planning process, because there's always at least 3 planning dinners before the weekend.
Yeah.
And at the first one, we kind of all get together and we'll have dinner, and then we're like, okay, cool. So where should we go? And then invariably the answer is, should we just go where we went last year? It's like, okay, yeah, cool, let's do that. And then the next one will be like, when should we go? It's like, August. Last year was August. Should we do August? Yeah, perfect. And then the third one will be, there's a spreadsheet of what everyone did last year. And that's the only one there's any real negotiation is like, should we change what we're having for dinner on Friday night? Is golf in or out this year? But like literally, it's the process of getting there, not just the weekend that matters. So I love that idea also of the joint bank account piece, because it feels like the thing that you would do with your partner. And it's kind of like, like this is at the same level as my wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever it is like, I'm going to treat this with the same level of integrity as that. Yeah.
And the fact that it takes away that massive excuse and I mean excuse in the kind of most valid way of, that is often the thing that gets in the way is either time or money. And therefore, if you remove one of those and you are scheduling it that far in advance or whatever, you can kind of avoid both of those big problems, those big kind of friction points, and then just get on with having a good time and planning this really cool activity or day out or weekend away or whatever it is.
Cool. And I know obviously the book hasn't gone to the final edit yet, but I am in it. Yeah.
You're correct.
Yeah, fantastic.
Just the acknowledgements page is just thanks, Simon. That's it.
Do you have any timeframes for it at the moment? I know these things always take a little bit longer than we imagine that they will.
Yes, TBC based on a couple of ongoing conversations. So I'm just going to leave it with that kind of very
entirely non-committal answer. Thanks.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being the very first guest ever on the Future with Friends podcast. You were absolutely a delight to have. You were the perfect guest. I will definitely get you back again sometime when we do have an audience as well. That will be even.
Say, you've given it a big, this is great that you're the first guest and things, but you have also said that we won't have any listeners for this one. So it's almost like you kind of.
I did say that to you though when I first spoke to you about it. I was like, so
Yeah.
like on one hand, it's kind of an honor. And on the other hand, literally, I'm like, there's zero exposure for you or anything. Like you're literally just donating your time while we record it.
That's correct. But basically, this is like a very elaborate tech check.
Yeah, they will be published somewhere though. So
maybe.
And even outside of that, I know we'll catch up and chat and again soon. But it was beautiful to have you, my friend, on the podcast. Thank you so much for being part of it.
Thanks, friend.
All right, bye.